Hello, class. All right, so this week we're talking about Germanic, and next week we're going to talk about the Nordic sagas. So there's two different stories, but they both have oral traditions of coming to a similar origin. So similar characters, but different names, and overall a kind of a different story. So the Nibelungenlied, is what we're going to be talking about this week. That's the Germanic, as the song of the Nibelungs. And the Nibelung is an ancient king with a great treasure, and we follow the story of the lineage of this great king and this treasure, and what happens to the heroes about it. Historically speaking, it comes from some old oral traditions, kind of dating back to maybe the 400s or so, with the Burgundian kingdom of Worms and Huns attacking. So there's some historical basis within the story itself. Then Christianity hits Iceland around 1000 AD, and then the poem itself is written around the early 1200s by an unknown author. Generally, it's perceived that the author is one person, possibly a priest, more than likely. And one of the biggest debates about this work is the influence that Christianity would have had upon this, because originally it has a lot of pagan and connections to Odin and that sort of Norse mythology. But by the time it's written, some things might have been changed. Sometimes also the knowledge kind of fell out of obscurity around the 1500s or so, and then 1755 it gets rediscovered. Also, the Nibelungenlied is one of those stories that Hitler during World War II made pretty popular. He pulled from it a lot to talk about a unifying culture and its stories. So it really, brought a lot of charismatic elements to his speech. So before we get into our reading and our homework, there's a little bit of information I need to go over because we're talking about the death of Siegfried. And the problem is if you don't know why these characters want to kill Siegfried, it doesn't quite make sense why the story is going over it. So a couple of elements to keep in mind. One is, and you can see this picture a little bit to the right, let's make it a little larger, is earlier in the story, Siegfried slays a dragon. And it's called Fafnir, and he bathes in its blood. He creates these holes, and with the blood, he gets supernatural powers and gets stronger. Except there's a leaf that falls on his back around his shoulder blade that connects to the heart. And because of that, that ends up being a weakness, which is actually quite symbolic. Not only physically is this his weakness, but also emotionally, as a character, ends up being one of his fatal flaws. That he has a heart, and it's so passionate and driven at times that he's kind of careless in his way. Another part of the story is that later Siegfried and he wants to marry a princess from Kriemhild. So in order to do that, Kriemhild's brother Gunther needs to marry someone that he is in love with, and that would be Brunhild. So in order to do this, he gets Siegfried to help him because Brunhild is a queen of like incredible strength and beauty. She's just like this warrior, and Gunther just cannot bring himself to overcome the challenges. So Siegfried has a magic cloak, and he's able to make it look like Gunther's this really strong and courageous and athletic person more than he really is. Now, the story takes a bit of a turn that after Brunhild sees Gunther do these things, she agrees, okay, I'll marry you. But she's not really she's not really into the marriage. She's pretty hesitant about this deal that she's sort of set up for herself. And so on the first wedding night, Gunther is tied up by Brunhild and quite embarrassed. So he asks for Siegfried again to help him in doing this. And this is one of the more controversial moments of the Nibelungenlied, is that he has to subdue her, and Brunhild is then kind of taken down, and after that, she loses her strength, her supernatural strength, and she becomes the more dutiful wife to Gunther, at least for a time. So it's a little more controversial because of the text. It sort of implies that perhaps he may have raped her, but the text is not clear whether it was a physical assault or whether it was more emotional and just um, to set up the plot and kind of connecting a little bit more to how like royalty and the courtship and how that's kind of viewed in its sort of Germanic medieval time. So later in the story, though, the two queens, Brunhild and Kriemhild, get together and then they have this big argument about whose husband is greater. Well, in the argument, Kriemhild not only reveals um, the secret to Siegfried's weakness on his back at an earlier spot, but during this argument itself leads to the revelation that Gunther did not do all these things, that it was Siegfried that did all these things, and Kriemhild's even wearing a belt that Brunhild used to wear until she was, subjugated. So this causes Brunhild to be incredibly angry and convince her husband that, we need to get rid of Siegfried. So this is the setup to why Siegfried, being even though this great and noble knight, has been entangled with his kinsman now, and they're out plotting against him. A few of the values I've mentioned in here do come up in the story of our reading, especially the loyalty part, because these are his kinsmen. So Siegfried is not thinking that they're going to betray him. He thinks they just love him and he trusts them completely. There's also a great element of providence here between how fate and the responsibility, the actions of the characters work out. So they work quite interchangeably. It's not quite like the ancient Greek stories where fate is this great cosmic force that the characters have no say in. This story does show that they're given a chance to remove themselves from the path of faith, but they still stick to it because of their own innate personality and flaws. Later next week, we'll go over the Saga of the Volsungs, and this is the Nordic version of it. And it was written later than the Nibelungenlied, but it is, in many ways, though orally still connected together. So the characters are similar, and it goes back to a sense of poetry. And this one is in prose. The Saga of the Volsung is written in more common language. So we'll go over more next week, but these are some of the name changes, and there's a list of differences between them. And there's so many, in fact, that they're really two different stories. So the same characters, but quite different, in fact. Okay, so with that, let's get to the reading. I'm going to be on the textbook in page 590. There's only a few things that really need to be read here. My explanation goes into more detail than what they give here, and some of the passages I just felt like were a little more confusing to like who are these characters and why are they out for revenge. So that explained here on page 590 a little bit. And one of the main connections too is that the first half of the Nibelungenlied is that it's about Siegfried, but Kriemhild takes over as the protagonist through the second part, and she goes on a big bloody revenge, and that really leads to the fall of the kingdoms and a strong historic connection. So it's because of that that it really takes quite a different turn. Let's go ahead and keep going down. I'm going to read a little bit about the tragic flaw, as this is one of the sort of subtexts and important elements to this. So, a tragic flaw is a character trait that brings about the hero's downfall. Understanding the role of the tragic flaw is epic. In an epic, is crucial to reading the Nibelungenlied. Siegfried is he's somebody who's very loyal, but at the same time, he's caught in this political intrigue, and he's just not thinking clearly that these people may actually be upset with him, and he should be more careful with them. And he doesn't realize that he's done some actions, and those actions are coming to light. He just, thinks he's been very loyal to them in all things. So again, that weakness that's physically on his back is also emotionally tied to his own character flaw. So I'm going to first scroll down to the last page for our homework questions 1, 2, and 3. So this is going to be page 597. So a few things to look out for as I'm just reading parts of it. First, there's an opening dialogue between Kriemhild and Siegfried, and there's a connection about the relatives. So how does each of them view the relatives? Part A. Part B, what does Siegfried say about them, and what does this indicate to you about his character? Right? What's his thoughts going into a time with his kinsman and how he perceives it? 2, describe Kriemhild's dream, and then B, interpret it. So she's going to have a dream, and this premonition is going to lead the audience that great danger is coming. And then question 3, why do you think so much time and attention is given to Siegfried's pursuit of the bear? And what is the tone of the passage? So when we get to that part, they're going to go on a hunt. And in the hunt, there's going to be a whole section about him pursuing this bear. And something to keep in mind is that these texts, when they were written, were handwritten. So anytime they had uh, so much text or devotion to something, it was something because they spent a lot of time wanting to teach you something of importance. So let's jump down to the second paragraph. Both Siegfried went to Kriemhild while his and his companions' hunting gear was being loaded onto the supporters in readiness to cross the Rhine. So the town they're in is next to the Rhine River. She could not have been more afflicted. God grant that I may see you well again, my lady, he said, kissing his dear wife, and that your eyes may see me too. Pass the time presently with your relations who are so kind to you, since I cannot stay with you at home. So, what we have here in this passage is when they both are showing up, and this is part of question 1. Kriemhild is apprehensive to coming here. She's a little bit worried that the the connection between her relatives and stuff is not as safe, and she's very cautious about being here. But Siegfried, on the other hand, thinks that everyone just loves him, and this is great. He's a great warrior. They love all the time they spent with him, so he thinks there's no danger to be had here. And then next paragraph. Kriemhild thought of what she had told Hagen, but she dared not mention it and began to lament that she had ever been born. So this thing that she had mentioned is the weakness. So Hagen is a vassal, is somebody connected to Gunther. He's a servant, and he's out for revenge. He has been in love with Brunhild, but that is a one-sided love, and it does lead him down the path of revenge because he thinks of Siegfried as somebody who's just embarrassed her in many instances. So he has learned of the weakness, and he's told Gunther about it, and they're plotting. And this is the dream, question 2. I dreamt last night, and an ill-omened dream it was, said Lord Siegfried's noble queen, weeping with unrestrained passion, that 2 boars chased you over the heath, and the flowers were dyed with blood. How can I help weeping so? I stand in great dread of some attempt against your life. So she has a dream, and this premonition is of 2 boars that are attacking one another, and there's great blood being shed. And we know, just already guessing in the audience, that the title is about Siegfried and how he's slain. So interpretation wise, you can guess that one of those boars is likely Siegfried, and while he's on this hunt, somebody will attack him. And she interprets this to be a great dread. Siegfried, on the other hand, on the next side, I shall return in a few days' time, my darling. I know of no people here who bear me any hatred. Your kinsmen without exception wish me well, nor have I deserved otherwise of them. So Siegfried is a bit oblivious that some of his actions in the past are coming back to cause him trouble. He hasn't heard anything, of course, but still he's not coming in very cautious, and that's something that's going to prove against him. So the rest of this passage, if you were to keep reading all through, it sets up his getting with his kinsmen, King Gunther and Hagen, and they're going to go on a big hunt. And they're going to, hunt down some animals, and at the end of the day, they're going to see who's hunted the most and drink and socialize and boast about all their great deeds and interesting stories they've come across that day. And one of the setups to this also is about hounds, and hounds are used when tracking these kinds of hunts. And the setup for Siegfried is that he's only going to bring one tracker. And this kind of language sets up how great Siegfried is at hunting and at being this noble knight who's well accomplished. He doesn't need much to go on this great hunt. And in fact, as we keep reading, he's able to hunt quite well. He brings in many kills. The very first kill was when he brought down a strong young tucker, after which he soon chanced on an enormous lion. When his hound had roused it, he laid a keen arrow to the bow and shot it so that dropped it to its tracks on the third bound. And it continues to go on how in this hunt Siegfried is able to accomplish a lot, and others are interested in who will be the greatest of the hunt. But at the end of the page, the hunt was over, yet not entirely so. Those who wished to go to the fire brought their hides of innumerable beats, beasts, and game of plenty. And they find that Siegfried has already accomplished so much. And then we're going to get to the part of the bear. So a horn is called to bring everyone in, and this is the dining portion where everyone's needs to be called in from the hunt, and they're going to share their stories. But I shall give our party some good entertainment, he said over his shoulder. Loose the hound, for I can see a bear which will have to come back to our lodges with us. It will not be able to save itself unless it runs very fast. The hound was unleashed, and the bear made off at speed. Siegfried meant to ride it down, but soon found that his way was blocked and his intention thwarted. While the mighty bear fancied it would escape from its pursuer, but the proud knight leapt from his horse and started to chase it on foot, and the animal, quite off its guard, failed to elude him, and so he quickly caught and bound it, without having wounded it at all. Nor could the beast use either claws or teeth on the man. Siegfried tied it to his saddle, mounted his horse, and in it high spurred fashion led it to the campfire in order to amuse the good knights. So in this part, question number 3 about the bear, for one thing, Siegfried, of course, doesn't need to do this. He's already well accomplished, but he sees a bear and thinks that everyone's going to love this. So he goes out of his way to get it. He has to get off his horse. He's able to chase down the bear, and he doesn't even use his sword or have some kind of struggle. He's really able just to wrestle this bear down, tie it up, and take it back to camp. He even, when he gets to the camp, lets the bear go, and it runs amok and eats some of the food, and yeah, it causes a little bit of trouble, but it seemed to lead to some good laughs. So overall, this point of the question is to show how great Siegfried is, that he is someone who is well accomplished. But it also shows not only his strength, but also his sense of sort of humor and how happy he is, and how he's not really suspicious of anyone at this point. And this is what's going to lead to emphasizing his guard being let down. So eventually, um, after some talks, Hagen, who's the great betrayer of this, Hagen convinced Siegfried that because they have no wine and he's thirsty, that there's the river nearby and they should go there and they should have a race. And in this race, Siegfried, of course, gets there first. But because of proper etiquette, he needs to wait for King Gunther to arrive to drink first. So he puts down his armaments. Well, Hagen gets there second. He loses the race, but that was not his plan. He takes Siegfried's sword and spear and things that he took with him, removes it so he will not have it. Then King Gunther gets there, drinks, then Siegfried drinks. And while he's drinking and his back is turned, Hagen leaps a spear into his back in that weak spot. And, the spear is lodged in his heart. But Siegfried is so well empowered from the blood of the dragon previously that he's able to chase down Hagen. Unfortunately, he only has a shield, so he's able to beat him down, but he doesn't finish him off. Had he had a sword, he would have been able to kill Hagen before he even dies. But sadly, there's great lamenting because the wound is fatal, and he gives a great speech to the characters, just lamenting the fact that they're kinsmen. How could you betray me? You're just bringing folly upon you. And then reminds them that his wife, Kriemhild, is not going to let this go, that she's going to come after that. And that sets up the narrative for the second part of this, where his wife goes on to get remarried and just builds her power. And she's very focused on this revenge. And this revenge leads to all kinds of tragedy and destruction by the end of it. So that is the main story of it. Hopefully that answers all three of the questions. Let me know if you have any more questions. You can always email me. And then next week we'll talk about the Saga of the Volsungs and how Siegfried, who's named Sigurd in that, how Sigurd is quite a different character. So we'll go over a lot of the differences there.